Dr. Nigel, Marvin,
My dear Doctor,
Suzanne,
welcome to
Prehistoric Park.
I don't believe it.
So in the last video you may have noticed that I wasn't using my normal voice, and I had quite a few complaints about that, so it's not going to happen again. However, the new video format actually works, because it turns out Fremantle can't detect 10-second clips, so we're all good. If the last episode was the most depressing, this one is probably the most fun. The plot is that Nigel drives his jeep headfirst into a carbonivorous swamp and spends the rest of the episode brawling with bugs. This is one of only 2 episodes where he stays in the past for the whole thing, rather than sending back animals at different points in the episode. The episode starts with Nigel taking the pilgrimage made by every paleontology student in Britain, which is to the Isle of Arran, where he sees some Arthropleura tracks. When he returns to the park, he finds out that Matilda has broken through the wooden fence separating her and her brother Terence, and she is trying to kill him. Bob darts her, but she doesn't go down quickly, so Nigel gets her to chase after him in a car. Now I have to point out at this point that the Tyrannosaurs seem to have grown up incredibly fast. Tyrannosaurs grew up fairly slowly until their 12th year, after which point their growth accelerated until they were about 20. However, these two seem to have gone from about 3 meters long to 9 in a matter of months. So now that's over with, Nigel decides to go back to the Carbonivorous. He drives his jeep straight into a swamp because they miscalculated where they were going to land. Why didn't they check where they were going to end up? It would only take one of them to put their head through the portal. Back in the present, Suzanne is treating Terence's wounds. Now I don't know much about being a vet, but I imagine what you do for birds is different from what you do for reptiles. Regardless, Suzanne uses reptile strategies on Terence, despite him having more in common with modern birds than any living reptile. In the Carbonivorous, Nigel decides to climb a massive lepidodendron tree to look for dragonflies. He spots one and decides to follow it down to a pool of water to find more. Back in the 21st century, Bob is still building the bug house. Yet again, Nigel didn't wait for it to be finished before setting out. A titanosaur then comes along to cause more havoc. Nigel spots an animatronic Arthropleura and chases it through the forest. It then becomes CG and rears up to face him. He tries to catch it as it scuttles away, but it slips from his grasp. I like how, as it runs away, you can see it make the track found in Arran, as it's a nice little reference. Back at Prehistoric Park, Suzanne is installing some enrichment activities in the Smilodon enclosure in the form of climbing frames, so they are more relaxed and more likely to breed. Bob has been told by a paleontologist that titanosaurs may need rounded stones for gastroliths, which aid in digestion. 300 million years ago, Nigel arrives at the Dragonfly Lake. After watching 2 males fight, he decides to go after one with a net, but gets bitten by a mysterious creature in the water. He then decides to set up camp for the night. Unfortunately, a storm starts and they are sleeping in hammocks. Bob's gastrolith plan is working well, while Suzanne realises that Terence has septicemia and decides to treat him with antibiotics. That night, Nigel spots a giant scorpion which fluoresces under ultraviolet light. He lets it crawl onto one of his party members so he can catch it by the tail, but is attacked by its pincers and drops it. Giant scorpions, Latin name Pulmona scorpius, lived in the Mississippian, the early Carbonivorous. Giant dragonflies lived in the Pennsylvanian, the late Carbonivorous, as well as the early Permian. Arthropleura lived through the Carbonivorous and into the Permian. The episode is set in the late Carbonivorous, so Pulmona scorpius should already be extinct. That morning he goes dragonfly hunting. A net doesn't work, so he uses a water gun with detergent that allows the insect to become waterlogged so he has time to catch it with his net. After many tries he finally gets one. However, Nigel spots something in the water, so dives after it. It's a Crassigorinus scoticus, a giant Mississippian amphibian. Like the scorpion, it should already be extinct, or maybe the episode should have just been set in the early Carbonivorous. Anyway, this is a fantastic animatronic. All the animals in this episode have animatronics, and they really help the action, as it gives Nigel something to wrestle with. He decides to let the animal go rather than to take it back to the park due to difficulties with safely transporting it. However, how hard can it be to carry it through the time portal and stick it in a pond? Nigel then decides to play with the animatronic Meganeurid. Now here's a question, how long is this thing going to live for? Dragonflies go no more than a few months in their adult form, so giant dragonflies might well be going extinct pretty soon for a second time. Suzanne decides to let the saber-tooths into the same enclosure so they can breed. How well does it go?
At least they're not attacking each other.
That'll do. Nigel then goes after the scorpion. He manages to catch it by the tail and turn it into another animatronic.
But this is tiny in comparison to the ancestors of the scorpions. They were Eurypterids.
Not really. Eurypterids are more closely related to horseshoe crabs than scorpions. He tries to put the scorpion into a cat basket, but it stings him. Things go from bad to worse when a forest fire from the previous night's storm heads their way. Now this time they admit that this is indeed a local extinction. The fire is moving quickly due to the high oxygen levels in the atmosphere. Nigel trips over another arthropleura and runs to the jeep to get a tarpaulin to wrap it up in. Thankfully, the arthropleura stays exactly where he left it rather than run off. They haul the arthropleura back to the jeep, and Nigel goes forward in time, leaving the others to the mercy of the forest fire. Only to return with a tow rope to the jeep. They are pulled through by a titanosaur. So how on earth did Bob know that he needed to get a titanosaur ready to pull them through? Or maybe Prehistoric Park finally went all timey-wimey and Nigel went into the future, got everything set up and came back to the Carnivorous only a few seconds after he left. Apparently rocks are treats for titanosaurs. So it turns out the scorpion venom is unlikely to be deadly to Nigel, as there were no mammals at the time of its evolution. The next day the arthropods are all adjusting to their new home in the insect house. I'm not sure how compatible the scorpion is with the other two. Terence has recovered well, and in the process wrecked Suzanne's surgery. So that was episode 5. There was a lot more stuff in the present in this episode, and a lot more to and fro between the two. The stuff in the past was great, and of all the episodes it had the most advice on how to catch the animals differently. The fact that there was no single target species helped, as it meant that the animals had pretty even screen time. The somewhat unrealistic part of the episode, aside from the scientific inaccuracies, was that Suzanne was simultaneously treating Terence and running the saber-tooth breeding program, but I can understand they didn't want any additional characters. In the next and final episode of Prehistoric Park, Nigel rescues a giant crocodile, before Prehistoric Park becomes a Jurassic Park parody.